In today's video, I'm going to be going over the fundamentals of John Mayer's pedalboard signal chain. This is going to be very helpful if you're looking to build your own John Mayer inspired pedalboard, or even if you just want to learn a little bit more as to how John actually does things in regards to his pedalboard setup. And as I mentioned, this video is on the fundamentals, the basics, kind of a level 1 approach, if you will, if you're building your own John Mayer inspired pedalboard. And I will work up in just future videos as well to kind of the more bigger, larger scale touring pedalboards that John has that can cover more songs and more tones and things like that. And this is me also remaking the first series I ever did on the channel like 6 years ago now, but in all those years we've had a lot more pedalboards, a lot more information has also come out, so we're kind of revisiting this subject from just a greater knowledge standpoint. But we're going to cover the basics today, and hopefully this helps you guys out a lot as to if you were to build your own pedalboard, kind of where you'd start with that signal chain and exactly how John does things. So we're going to take a look at a couple of John's pedalboards first, just for some greater context as to kind of where I'm referencing and kind of getting some different information from as well. And we'll kind of run through, okay, so how you'd build the pedalboard, how John would set up his signal chain to cover those basic John Mayer tones that we all know and love. So if we were talking about John Mayer pedalboard fundamentals, the John Mayer Trio era is such a great reference point because this board really does, for the most part, cover those fundamentals, and the concepts that you see with the John Mayer Trio board really have carried on throughout John's career, and you can really kind of apply these for pretty much any era as well. But I don't just kind of want to talk about things just from the John Mayer Trio pedalboard perspective. We have Hotel Cafe as well, where you kind of see a little bit more of a modern approach to a very basic John Mayer style of pedalboard. And then we also have the Solo Tour as well, where the electric pedalboard, that really kind of is the fundamentals at this point in time in terms of the modern John Mayer sound as well. And John, of course, has had lots of other smaller pedalboards as well, and a couple others that I will kind of want to reference, but we're going to be talking about the fundamentals as a whole in its entirety, and especially as we get into the drive pedals. I'll try my best to kind of really make it very clear as to if you're looking for a certain era, here's kind of the pedals and the setup that you'd want to have to really, you know, emulate that the best and kind of get those tones the most accurately. But if you're kind of looking for a broader perspective as well, it kind of gives some advice as well as to kind of how I would do things just to cover everything. So we're going to start off here, and I'll have a nice Photoshop kind of, you know, version of the board, and we'll kind of build it as we go along, kind of like I did in the very first kind of version all those years back for this video. So we have our guitar. You're going to start off with a tuner. John has used the Boss TU2. I can't believe I blanked on that for a second. And the TC Electronics Polytune 3. That's the one John's been sticking with for quite a few years now at this point. So if you're wanting to get the exact same tuner that John's been using, just get a Polytune 3. So now we're going to move on into kind of the boost and drive section of the pedalboard. Now, when it comes to this setup, there's a handful of different ways you can kind of approach what you are wanting to do. But what is consistent throughout all of the different eras is we start off with a clean boost, and that's going to be the Keeley Katana version 1. Sometimes it's the Exotic Super Clean as well. Sometimes it's multiple boosts on the pedalboard. But in terms of a fundamental standpoint, you're going to want to start off with just a really good clean boost. John doesn't do a whole lot of boosting his signal at the end, like at the very end, you know, after everything else. He really kind of more focuses on boosting at the very start of the signal chain, and then that boost will slam into all of the other effects that are on the board, all of the drive pedals, and really just kind of saturate his tone as well. Now, in terms of the boost, no, the Keeley Katana is not always on. That's kind of a concept I've talked about a lot on the channel. John's used multiples at times, sometimes with like the Black One, for example. If he wants to kind of boost that tone to match the other guitars, he'll have one that's used as a leveler, but then another one that's used as that more traditional Keeley Katana, John Mayer clean boost sort of thing, as a pure clean boost when he needs. That's like the born and raised in Paradise Valley approach to things, at least. But from the fundamental standpoint, you're just going to have this clean boost to boost your clean guitar signal for either solos or even for a song like Belief or Vultures when you just want a bit of a punchier, clean tone. These are kind of just going to push that core tone with your amplifier up a little bit. So clean boost, Keeley Katana, or exotic super clean, both really great options for this kind of intro phase of the pedal board. Now we're going to get into the drives. Okay, so the drive section of the pedal board is where things I think get really fun, but also just a little bit complicated because John's drive section has evolved and changed through different eras. So if you're wanting to build a John Mayer inspired pedal board, but let's say you really want to focus on the sounds of Continuum, well, that would be different than the setup as to someone who wanted to build a pedal board that really focused on, let's say, the tones of more of the kind of modern John Mayer lead tone, like Sob Rock, for example, or kind of any of the other performances that John has done kind of recently. So depending on the era, things will change, but I'm also going to cover it from that kind of perspective of, let's say you want to have a setup that covers all of the sounds, all of the eras really, really well, and kind of what I would do at that point. So what we're going to do is on the board, we're going to throw down a Tube Screamer. Now the Tube Screamer, the TS10 is what John's just been using insanely religiously since 2007. He's also used the Keeley modded TS808 and a vintage TS808 as well. And John has said that the Keeley modded 808 is paint chip close to the vintage version, and it's just a really good substitute for that vintage tone. But really, JHS Bonsai, John has used that as well. Any good Tube Screamer will do, but we're kind of sticking with obviously what John exactly uses. And then you guys can also kind of filter through and decide, you know, what clone you may want to use if you're building your own pedal board. So the Tube Screamer TS10 is going to go on the pedal board, but we're going to leave a space where you can place some things before it and after as well, because this is going to change depending on the era. So early days of John's tone, if you're wanting to do the trio sort of thing, you're going to go with the Keeley modded blues driver into your Tube Screamer. TS808 is going to be the most kind of accurate for the John Mayer trio era. And then you're done. Very basic, a light kind of overdrive pushing the Tube Screamer. Now this is kind of a concept as well that really extends into kind of the kind of bulk of John's career, is you have an overdrive that's going to be pushing the Tube Screamer. That's kind of the, if you think of the quintessential John Mayer tone, that is what you are going for. Continuum, it switched from the Keeley modded blues driver to the Marshall Blues Breaker, the original version 1, into the TS10. That's kind of, again, that's the fundamental sound. When it came to the Klon Centaur getting added into the mix, guess what? It was Klon Centaur into TS10. So whatever light overdrive you are kind of wanting to use, pushing the Tube Screamer, that's kind of the quintessential John Mayer sort of tone. However, if you're wanting to take the more modern approach to the way John Mayer gain stacks overdrives that he's stuck to doing pretty consistently over the past couple of tours and years, then you are actually going to want to have the TS10 pushing the Klon Centaur. So TS10 into Klon Centaur, or a Tube Screamer into a Klon style of pedal. That's what John really, at least in kind of modern times, seems to prefer. And personally, this is the way that I also prefer this gain stacking approach when it comes to at least the Tube Screamer and a lighter overdrive. When I owned my Klon Centaur, I absolutely loved the sound of the TS10 pushing it, because the Klon Centaur has a lot more headroom than the TS10 does. So to me, it just sounded better to my ears. I liked that tone better when the TS10 was actually pushing the Klon Centaur. You might not prefer the sound of a Tube Screamer pushing a Klon style of pedal like I did. And this is where, you know, you can also just do what sound you also prefer. You don't have to follow this kind of layout that I'm giving you guys exactly. But if you're wanting to kind of know at least how John does it depending on the era, then this is kind of what you are wanting to follow. But the modern approach, like in the Hotel Cafe pedal board, you guys will see TS10 into Klon Centaur. That is, you know, kind of that quintessential modern John Mayer tone, but even as like far back years and years, John's been experimenting with this order. So it's always a little bit of an it depends sort of thing, like the performance on Conan of California Dreamin' with the John Mayer Trio, one of my favorite Mayer tones of all time. That was way back years ago, but for that performance, it was TS10 into Klon Centaur. So it's always a little bit of an it depends sort of thing when it comes to the way John Mayer has mixed and matched the Tube Screamer and the Klon Centaur. But kind of the more classic born and raised Paradise Valley approach is the Klon Centaur into the TS10, and then more modern, think of TS10 into Klon Centaur, starting off with the 2019 World Tour. I don't want to tangent too much here, but the 2019 World Tour is so interesting when it comes to the pedalboard because John was really experimenting with things so much at this point in time. The 2019 World Tour, the drive setup started off with the TS10 into the Klon Centaur, but then from the North American leg, it changed and was Klon Centaur into TS10, and then it kind of stayed like that for the most part throughout the rest of the 2019 World Tour. But John, even in the middle of a tour, was experimenting with the order of the TS10 and the Klon Centaur. So that's kind of what you can think of in terms of, you know, what kind of errors you want to do for at least those two pedals. But what if you're wanting to kind of have a board that would do everything really, really well and kind of cover all the bases? You don't want to just focus entirely on one specific era. Now, this is where you're going to utilize both having something after the Tube Screamer and before it. So you can both push the Tube Screamer with an overdrive and then have the Tube Screamer pushing a different style of overdrive as well. Now, kind of my favorite approach to doing this would be to have the Marshall Blues Breaker or the Keeley modded Blues Driver into the Tube Screamer, into the Klon Centaur. That's kind of my personal favorite approach to doing this because you're going to cover those John Mayer Trio Continuum era sort of tones by pushing the Tube Screamer with those pedals, but then as well you're kind of covering that more modern John Mayer sound as well by pushing the Klon with the Tube Screamer. And personally, when I did this on my pedalboard back when I owned my Centaur, I had the Keeley modded Blues Driver into the TS10 into the Klon Centaur. Now, I'm a bit unique where I actually don't like John's Klon settings that much. Personally, I preferred having the gain knob on the Klon a bit more higher up because I think that's where the magic of that pedal really is and how it sounds as an overdrive pedal. So again, I wasn't even doing things exactly as John did. I preferred the Klon, you know, with a bit more drive actually on that. And you guys might try that as well and really like it. Again, you can kind of take these fundamentals and then figure out what you like from there. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. If you just like how it sounds, and that's how you should definitely do it. But again, focusing on what you kind of do in terms of trying to stay as true as possible to what John does and his sound. However, now from that, there's also another way of looking at this, which I've never personally done, but I have a couple of examples as to what I think John has actually done. And it's to have the Klon Centaur into the TS10 and then into the Marshall Blues Breaker. This pedalboard shot that you guys are going to have on your screen now is from the John Mayer Trio show on December 31st, New Year's Eve in 2009. And this pedalboard is really interesting because you have the Keeley Katana into the Klon Centaur, into the TS10, and then you can trace the cables up to the Marshall Blues Breaker and then to the Aquapus, which we'll get into delays and things in just a moment here. But this is another really interesting look at, okay, when John's had those three pedals on his pedalboard, there hasn't been that many times he's done that. That is the order he went with. So that's another thing you can try out as well. And I'm sure it probably sounds really, really good. There's a great California Dreamin' performance as well from that show, which I'll play a little bit of that for you guys. I won't be able to play too much of it, but I'll play just a snippet for you of John's solo. But the other thing that's kind of interesting is if you look at the 2025 Festival Touring Pedalboard for kind of the latest version of John gain stacking with different overdrive pedals, and this is probably getting a little bit away from the fundamentals, but I'd rather be more thorough than not in this video for you guys, so I hope you appreciate that. But if you assume that the signal chain of the drives at least is, if you're John looking down at the board, right to left, it would be TS10 into Klon Centaur into Marshall Bluesbreaker Mark 1. That is a vintage unit as well. It is not a reissue, I can promise you guys that. And that's kind of the latest thing we've seen when John's had both the Bluesbreaker and the Klon on the board. And there's a good chance as well that this could be the same setup that we see John using for the board and tour in the support of his upcoming album. Hopefully later this year, at least we get some new music from John. But if you guys want my advice, what I would personally do, I would do BD2 or Bluesbreaker into Tube Screamer, into Klon Centaur to cover all of the bases, because like I said, that covers the Trio era, Continuum era. It kind of covers Born and Raised as well a bit, because you're still pushing the Tube Screamer for that overdrive sort of tone with a lighter overdrive, but then you also cover the modern sounds as well. So personally, that's kind of how I would approach it for just doing everything really, really well. But again, it's all preference. You might like the trio setup where it's got the Klon Centaur, TS10 into Bluesbreaker, because that's something John has done before. It's definitely worth trying out, but I would personally go with Bluesbreaker, TS10, Klon, but that's just me. Okay, now moving on to the delays, and even though we're covering the fundamentals of a John Mayer style of pedalboard and his tones, you are going to want to have two different delay pedals on this board. The first being the slapback, and that's 99.9% of the time covered with the Way Huge Octopus, generally the vintage units, but then there are some exceptions, like he has also used quite often the Mark II version as well for that slapback sound, and then the Mark III he's used like once, but the Octopus from Way Huge, that's kind of the pedal that's going to be covering that slapback sort of sound. No, it is not always on. I've actually made a video going over when John Mayer actually uses the Way Huge Octopus for that slapback, giving some actual like real examples of John utilizing that pedal. It's not always on, but it certainly is a really cool pedal that definitely it's very quintessential to the John Mayer sort of sound. It's subtle, but it just thickens up the tone a little bit, and it just definitely does this sort of thing. So a fundamental John Mayer pedalboard is going to have the Way Huge Octopus on it, followed by a pedal that covers the longer delay sort of sounds. The most famous one that John has kind of been associated with is the Pete Cornish TES, but as well the Providence Delay 80s or the Providence Chrono Delay are kind of the more modern delay pedals that John has used as well. So if you're kind of wanting to get like a really good delay pedal for that longer sound, the Providence Chrono, that's a really good one to go after. John's used that one so much since the 2019 World Tour. There's also the T-Rex replay box, was kind of used before the Chrono was added to the pedalboard for kind of that digital delay with tap tempo. But then as well, you go all the way back to like the Trio era, the T-Rex replica, which to me is such a great delay pedal to do the John Mayer sort of thing. It really does, in my opinion, a brilliant job of doing the Providence Delay 80s Pete Cornish TES sort of delay sound, because at the end of the day, those are two different kind of sort of delay sounds. There's the Delay 80s TES sort of sound, and then as well, there's kind of the more digitally delayed thing, like with the Chrono. To me, they are two different things. But from that fundamental standpoint, I hope this is making sense. You're going to want at least one of them just to cover a longer delay sort of sound, regardless of kind of the details and like the exact kind of tones you are going for. But for me, the T-Rex replica does such a good job of doing that TES Delay 80s sort of delay thing. And it's a lot more accessible, a lot more affordable. That's always one I really love and recommend as well to do that sort of thing. Now, one exception to this rule that I do just want to mention, because you might have picked up on it if you're looking at the version of the John Mayer Trio pedalboard that I was showing you guys, depending on the angle and the exact shot of the board. During the Trio era, John actually went with the replica into the Octopus. I don't know why. It's very interesting, and on some different boards as well, it might seem like, depending on where the Octopus is placed, that it might be after the longer delays, but generally speaking, John does go with slapback into longer delays, and that's where I would leave it if we're covering the fundamentals. Then there's really just one more pedal and kind of sound that I feel like really needs to be covered here now at this point for a fundamental style of John Mayer pedalboard, and it's really the Strymon Flint. You have the reverb side, which there's kind of a misconception that John doesn't use the reverb side of the Strymon Flint, but he actually does. And again, I've done a whole video talking about when John uses both sides of the Strymon Flint. That'll be linked in the description down below for you to check out as well if you would like. But the harmonic trim side, think of for gravity, the extra reverb as well. That at this point, I think if you're building a John Mayer style of pedalboard and you want to cover all of the fundamentals, the Flint, I think, really is a must-have, and just the Flint. That's the one that John really has favored since the Born and Raised Paradise Valley era. It's the one he's stuck with. He just, you can tell he loves that pedal. So just get the Flint. If you're wanting to do the Mayer thing, there's lots of other great ones like the Hydra from Keeley I really love as well, quite a lot, and it's a great option too, but John's used the Flint, so if you're wanting to stay true to John, the Flint is the one that I just personally would recommend. And then that kind of covers the fundamentals of John Mayer's pedalboard setup. We're going to get into in future installments of the kind of, redoing this series. We're going to talk about if you want to cover some different songs, kind of do more of the sob rock thing, kind of getting into the third overdrive as well for those really big, powerful solo tones like Belief, for example. We're going to get into all of that in future episodes. So I hope you guys like just me kind of going back through this concept and kind of talking about things from the standpoint of having new versions of the pedalboards to talk about, just knowing more at this point too, at this stage in my John Mayer gear nerd wisdom, for lack of a better way of describing it, and just, everything like that as well. So I thought it was a great time to kind of go over the basics again, the fundamentals, and I really do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions as well that you'd like to see me kind of go over in the future episodes in this, pedalboard signal chain series, leave them in the comments down below and I'll make sure I can kind of address those as we move on to kind of the intermediate and then the advanced as well, kind of stages of building a Mayer pedalboard. And I hope you guys liked as well, just me kind of also kind of talking about, okay, here's different options as well. And then even on like this board here, it's like showing the Mark III version. This is a great option to use. Use that going into a Chrono, very accessible, in my opinion, options. They're ones you can just go out and buy at retail instead of, trying to track down some vintage, kind of hard to find stuff like the Klon. Jeff Archer, John's kind of Klon Centaur clone of choice. That's a great option as well, or even the Archer Icon. I really like that pedal too. So there's different options as well, but kind of focusing more on exactly what John uses. Hope that makes sense, what I'm trying to say. Hope you guys enjoyed the video anyways. Like I said, any questions, anything you want me to discuss in the future episodes, leave them in the comments down below. Take care, everyone. Hope this helped you out, and have a great rest of your day.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.